Hello, and welcome to the Thinking Elixir podcast, where we cover the news of the community and learn from each other. My name is Mark Erickson.
And I'm David Bernheisel.
Let's jump into the news. First up, this one is a bit of a mind bender. There's a new project that Jose shared on Blue Sky, and he said, we will focus on interoperability for 2025, and we are ready to share the first results.
Ooh.
So this is a new package called PythonX, and it's under the Livebook Dev GitHub organization. But what PythonX is it is the ability to embed the Python runtime in Elixir. This is like, it's kind of crazy, right? It's like, okay. So to go along with this, to really help explain it, there's a link to a blog on the Dashbit blog called Running Python in Elixir. It's fine. And there's actually a pun with the fine part, which we'll get back to in a minute.
Yep.
And there's another blog post about running ML models in Elixir using PythonX. So it's interesting, but it doesn't have to be just ML models, right? So I saw a message from Wojtek Mach showing how he used rec to make a request and then loaded up a Python library and made a Python library request and got it back in JSON in Elixir too. So this is more than just like, oh, I can shell out to a Python application and get a result back.
This is pretty crucial. Yeah, it's very oriented towards ML at the moment, but yeah, like you said, it has nothing to do with it really. That's probably why they're looking into it. I've also had some at my workplace, we were able to play around with something like PythonX for other non-ML things. Python's also really good at and by Python, it probably really means all of the Python C bindings. So it's really all the C libraries that they have, just to be clear. But Python also has a vibrant ecosystem for natural language processing, which is kind of like that whole field before machine learning. We actually use a touch of that kind of stuff too. And so the age-old battle of like, I have this niche of things that I need to do that has libraries in Python, but I don't want to get all that infrastructure set up for Python. I don't want to deploy a Python app. I don't want to wrap like a JSON endpoint stuff. I just don't want to do all that stuff. I just need to use, some library or something like that, right? That's it. And I feel like that's where PythonX really, really shines. I'm going to call back here. Python, yes, it has a lot of libraries that are good for this, but they're 9 times out of 10 when it comes to like ML things, they're just wrapping up C++ libraries. And so that brings us to Fine.
Well, before we jump into Fine, because Fine is a significant project in its own right. But before we jump there, I want to touch on how some of this PythonX is working, which is the UV package manager. So UV is described as an extremely fast Python package and project manager written in Rust. So that's how it's bringing in and doing some of this connection. It's through the Rust library that's already wrapped up some of this work. That's interesting, and that's cool. In the section of the blog, in the under the hood, they say, so Python, or more specifically, its CPython reference implementation, has the interesting capability of being embedded into other applications. What this means is that the core functionality of the Python interpreter is available as a C library, so a C/C++ application can link that library and use its API to run code and interact with objects. You're exactly right. It's getting down into the C bindings of these things. And so that's also stuff that's already been out there and existing. All of these other parts around the Python community that help it integrate to other things. So that's awesome that the Elixir community is able to leverage some of that work. But yeah, now we got to talk about Fine.
And I can't talk about Fine without also talking about Rustler and Ziggler, right? Because they kind of do the same kind of thing, right? Ziggler is the Zig interface for interfacing Elixir and Erlang terms in and out of Zig. Ziggler also has all those extra nice, things on top, like the sigil Zig stuff, good documentation, but a lot of what it does is memory management and all that stuff back into Elixir and Erlang to and from like Zig. But a big chunk of that is marshaling all those different terms back and forth. And by terms, I mean, and that now I'm going to have to act like I know Zig, but like, so Zig has, like a unsigned integer 32 or something like that. Maybe that's more C, but Zig probably has something like that too. And so how do you serialize that to and from, Elixir? That's what Zig and Ziegler take care of for you. Rustler is of the same mindset. They have to marshal all the terms back and forth, the types, take care of the types. Well, they are for Zig and Rust, but what about good old C and C++? And that's where Fine comes in. And so Fine is a binding, I guess you could say, an interop layer between Erlang NIFs, which also has its own headers for what it's worth, Erlang NIFs and Elixir. And so they have a whole list of all the terms in the Fine repository. You'll find it there on their README of all the terms that they can, get back and forth in and out of Elixir. Things like, 64-bit integers, unsigned, signed, doubles, bools, an Erlang NIF PID, right? We have our own, set of types on our side too, right? On Erlang's, we got a PID. Binary means something different to us than it does most other programs. Strings, atoms, null. What is null? Optional types, things like that. That's what Fine is doing. So a lot of these nifty kind of programs and the packages that we've been using maybe happily for such a long time with Elixir, they've likely already been doing this and maybe just disparately, as in all doing their own version of this. And now Fine is a collection of that, maybe dare I say blessed way of handling NIFs and marshaling that stuff back and forth, and also taking care of I think that's what I understand here is like also taking care of like how to compile that when you do like deps.git, right, and mix compile. Like there has to be some compile tool chain in there. I don't know if Fine actually takes care of that. I think you have to have like GCC or Clang and all that kind of stuff, on your system, but at least taking care of like the including directories with all the correct files in their headers and source and all that stuff.
Looking at the Dashbit blog, one of the things that I interpret it as is that the EXLA work, when with early parts of NX, Elixir was hooking into Google's XLA so we called it EXLA. That a lot of that code about how to marshal that data back and forth, that is what got extracted into Fine. And then there's a link in the blog post to that commit where it's like, okay, now we're just going to refactor all of that out of EXLA and reference Fine. And that's like over 1,000 lines of code. So like that's the kind of thing that you can think of that Fine is doing for you. It's giving you that layer of interoperability to talk to C bindings.
So that's very nice. Like I said at the top, I can't not compare this to Ziegler and Rustler. So I'm going to get nerd sniped on this, but I'm going to personally challenge myself to go put in a Python sigil in there, make it a little bit like, I'm talking about PythonX at this point, not Fine, but get a Python X sigil in there so we can make it act a little bit like Ziegler, because Ziegler just, I don't know, it left such an impression on me. Maybe I shouldn't care so much, but Ziegler, I just feel like was a very good API, a friendly API to Elixir devs. So if we can get that kind of experience, that's going to be great.
I do want to mention, we are going to go deeper on this topic in a future episode. But before you get overly excited about thinking what you could do with this, there are some real world gotchas that you need to think about. And that's particularly that Python has the GIL, or the global interpreter lock. And that still remains. And that's a problem for Python, but it's a problem if you have multiple Elixir processes that are all wanting to interact with the same Python code. So really the way you should manage this and think about this, in my mind, the way I'm thinking about this right now is I have maybe a gen server that loads up and is interacting with and managing this PythonX library access, because my gen server is going to make everything serialized. And it's going to make it so I'm not actually trying to hit it with asynchronous calls at the same time. It can work that way. And they're saying, there's a whole section in the blog post about this, saying usage considerations and alternatives, saying, hey, if that doesn't quite meet what you need, you can also do system command and, shell out or use a port or other ways of doing this.
So now I'm going to have to act like I know Python. But 2 years ago, Python did accept a proposal, PEP 703, that was 2 years ago. I have to go catch up on what the current status is of everything. But that proposal is about getting rid of the global interpreter lock. So that maybe that's still true today, that by default, there's still the global lock, which matters to us. But maybe there's a soon future, a near future, where Python cannot globally lock. Maybe that complicates things further for us, but we'll see.
Yep. Well, that's exciting stuff, and we'll have to dig into it more in the future.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Hey, next up, there was an academic paper written along with some code to do it about compiling Elixir code to an eBPF backend. What is an eBPF backend, you might ask? Well, glad you asked, because there's a YouTube video that explains it, and we've got a link to the PDF academic paper because that's how they do. But we also have a link to the GitHub repository that kind of goes into this example. So what is eBPF? It is an extended Berkeley packet filter. Still very not helpful to know that, is it? Here's another version. It's a technology that allows developers to run sandboxed programs directly in the Linux kernel space without modifying the kernel source code or loading kernel modules. So it means that eBPF code can run in the Linux kernel and get that kernel level privilege. That's the benefit of it, right? And that's why you would go down to those layers at all, really. And so what typical use cases does that imply then? Security is one. It allows for real-time monitoring and filtering of system events, enabling early detection, response to security threats. That's one use case that you might see eBPFs used for. Another one is networking. So it can be used for packet processing, load balancing, and network observability, probably about security as well, right?
Yeah.
Performance monitoring, if you wanted to see how things were going in the rest of the system, this just has it's a direct tap into the kernel, which is responsible for all the performance things as well. Tracing, observability, all the same kind of things. These eBPF programs are typically written in a restricted C subset and then compiled into eBPF bytecode using compilers like LLVM. And yeah, it's attached to various hook points. I'm vaguely recalling now compiling the Linux kernel and how there are hooks into that. I'm thinking of old time stuff, but you used to have to opt into low latency kernels for sound. If you wanted to do sound recording stuff, you had to opt into additional kernel hooks and compile that. So perhaps this is where eBPF kind of hooks in as well. And now you might be wondering, where is this used? Well, it's used by probably the folks you can imagine, but it's used by Google, Netflix, Microsoft, Cloudflare, various use cases, security, oriented kind of things. You could probably, I would bet, I don't know, but I would bet something like Jamf, all the corporate things that kind of hook into your computers to monitor what you're doing. It's that kind of stuff. All right. So getting it back around to what this means for us, that's eBPF generally, and getting back to the paper. So the paper describes how Elixir could be compiled now to do the same things, right? So we have a link to a repo called Honey Potion. And Honey Potion is a good description and is part of the paper for what it's worth too. So you can see more in the paper about this. But Honey Potion is just the example of how to do the eBPF compilation flow for Elixir applications. So very interesting, very cool to see this. I'll say one last thing on this is that Elixir is typically not seen as a systems language, right? Systems language is usually almost 100% C. Right? Linux is just now getting around to, and there's actually drama on this, we won't talk about it, but there's just now getting around to allowing Rust in there. But then you got Rust and then Go, which are typically seen as other system languages, but not kernel level things, right? Now, Elixir does have an opportunity here, proven by this academic paper, and now this example repo. Even Elixir can get into systems level kinds of software, which is very interesting to think about.
Yeah. Interesting to see what happens from that, because I can imagine people wanting to say, I'd like to write some of this logic in a higher level language like Elixir rather than writing it in C code. Very cool. congrats on the major project, and hopefully that won them a PhD.
Yeah.
All right, next up, Chris McCord teased another couple AI updates on his progress of what he's creating. The first one is a brief video showing him instructing an LLM to create a new Phoenix application by running a single one-line command. The LLM does it through the integrated IDE, generates the Phoenix application, and then starts it and is running it. So that's pretty cool.
Wow.
And then the next one showed the usage of Anthropic Claude 3.7, which is the latest from Anthropic. It was generating a Phoenix blog site that supported Markdown posts, and the LLM added HTTP basic auth for admin, without even being prompted to do that. You kind of got to see the video because it shows how the theme was designed for this. The prompt that Chris gave it for the theme was a Minority Report / sci-fi themed, but not overboard. And it comes up with this pretty cool looking interface with all these little animations and movements and like CSS stuff. It's like, that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
For developers, it's been mocked how utilitarian the websites might come out of what we might typically create, because we're not like super skilled on the CSS styling side. So, hey, being able to tell an LLM, hey, make this look pretty and kind of inspired by this other website, something like that. That'd be pretty cool.
We can play too. Yeah. That's amazing. All right, last up, Goatmire tickets are on sale now. Goatmire is a conference happening in Varberg, Sweden on September 10th through the 12th in 2025 this year. You can go find those tickets at goatmire.com, and you'll find a section there about tickets. The tickets are actually really cheap too. I won't spoil it, but you got to go look at it yourself.
And that's it for the news. Today's Thinking Elixir show is brought to you by our friends at Elixir, the premier deployment platform for Elixir and Phoenix projects. If you use the promo code THINKING during signup, you get 20% off the standard tier prices for an entire year. That's THINKING at gigelixir.com, or you can visit the gigelixir.com/thinking to sign up today and get 20% off your first year. And we have links to that in the show notes. Today, we're being joined by our special guest, Kimberly Ernie. Kimberly, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Today, we want to talk about the job market, specifically how it's impacting the Elixir community, but also broadly how the tech market is acting and how it's impacting us. So we're excited to have Kimberly join us for that discussion. But before we get into that, Kimberly, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Like, what is your current situation and where are you living?
Yeah. So I am living in Lehi, Utah. So a great tech hub. There's a lot of Elixir opportunities here. And I am currently looking for a job. I took a break about 8 or 9 months ago now, and I'm feeling ready to jump back in. And so, yeah, I'm probably like junior to mid-level and just excited to hopefully find another position.
Awesome. Yeah. And so one of the things that we've been observing is how the market can be very different for senior versus junior, mid-level. They're not being treated the same. And so we're glad Kimberly could join us to help share some of the perspectives that you've been experiencing on the junior/mid side too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So David, I think you and I qualify as senior. So we'll go with that.
I think I qualify for old at this point. Not to be ageist against myself, really. I guess I'm not really all that old, but yeah, anyone that looks at me knows I've got a bit too much gray in my beard.
Kids will do that.
Yeah, kids. But it's awesome. But it's true. Yeah, we're senior Elixir developers. We've been around for 7+ years at this point, right?
Yep.
Been around the block, seen the bad things, seen some good things, and have the experience now to hopefully discern a direction, the better direction to go.
So the question was really, why talk about this now, right? And just for some context, more recently, I accepted a new job at a company called Kuali. They are actually in Lehi, Utah as well, because there is a big Elixir and tech scene in the Utah area. Specifically, Kuali works in the education space. They make software for universities and similar types of groups. And when I started looking for the job, I realized that the job market was much more grim and different than the last time I was in the job market. There weren't as many positions available. Many companies were wanting in-person work as opposed to remote. And there was a lot of competition for the fewer available job positions. And so I knew of Kimberly from the Elixir community and from meetups, and I knew she was looking for a job too. And I knew she was seeing some of these same types of challenges. So Kimberly, I was wondering if you could share some of your experience as what the job market was looking like when you said, I'm ready to start looking for a position. What did you experience? What was that like?
Yeah, so I'd been told that, just the tech market in general is kind of rough right now. So I will say that it's hard not to get that out of my mind when I'm looking. But I also have had just good advice given to me that friends hire friends and to make friends and to network with people. Mm-hmm. And so I've kind of taken both approaches of just making friends with people. If I see a company that's hiring that looks interesting to me, I'll reach out and get to know some of the developers on the team, or just, using my network. I put myself as open to work, and that was helpful. Someone reached out to me through that, and I ended up getting an interview with them. Even though I didn't get the job, they said that even getting an interview was good. I guess there were 5,000 applicants for that position. So, yeah.
That example right there is indicative and very telling, right? So you got the interview because of a personal connection to somebody, but there are 5,000 applicants for this job. So it's that's showing two things, right? There are a lot of people looking for trying to compete for the same position, but also the importance of even being able to stand out to get the interview. They're not giving interviews to 5,000 people, right? It's physically impossible. So being able to get that interview is because of some personal connection you had.
Right.
So very cool. So bigger picture job market stuff. One of the things I think has impacted us, this is something I've heard, and it's it makes sense to me. So, take it with a grain of salt, is the idea that in the US, the economic market just changed, specifically because of inflation. So then the Federal Reserve starts to kick up interest rates, and that really turned off the money spigot for the VC funding. So the VCs are like, oh, we're not investing so heavily. So then you have all these companies who are not yet profitable, and they're trying to grow at this unrealistic or unsustainable pace. Especially it's unsustainable when the money gets turned off. So now they're going through these major layoffs and saying we have to get to a point where we can be profitable and sustainable. And then you have all these high quality people that are now looking for jobs. I think that's part of the whole overall market.
I think the job market is hurting in several ways. You pointed out one. Yeah, the seed money for a lot of the startups is tougher to get, perhaps. I guess it depends on the market, but I think generally, as of time of recording anyway, generally the entire market is kind of going down. But there's other aspects too. For example, remote work. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about remote work for a little bit. I suspect, I have no data here. Maybe there is some data. I just need to confirm my suspicion here, but I suspect that Elixir developers probably enjoy remote work more often than other programming languages do. Generalizing here, I would bet that most major cities have a good collection of Java developers or TypeScript developers, right? Given that a lot of the larger companies can afford downtown real estate, they're probably going to be hiring for what their area supports, aka Java developers and JavaScript developers, that kind of stuff. Maybe excluding Lehigh, Utah, but most cities probably don't have a healthy collection of already established Elixir developers, and so their pool of their hiring pool is going to be more focused on remote work. Mm-hmm. Now, at least in the U.S., I think that there's been generally in the past 6 months or so, there's definitely been a trend of companies reversing their posture on remote work for one reason or another. Good or bad doesn't really matter. The fact of jobs being open or not is the result that we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. That's another angle that I think is going to be tougher for Elixir devs in particular. Is that we've enjoyed remote work more so than others. The job market as well for startups a little bit tougher. And then maybe one more thing to consider too is 5 years ago, we didn't really have AI on the scene, not the way that we know it. And we can revisit all these topics if you want to, but the AI being on the scene kind of changes things for developers, right? You can read all the headlines about the doom and gloom of what developers are, not going to have a job in 5 years. I don't think that's true, but that's the doom and gloom of it. I think there's two ways to look at this. There are the popular, huge, large language models out there that the collective general population would use, like OpenAI.
Yeah.
It's not a micro or contextual kind of LLM. It's just, hey, I've scoured all of an intellectual property out there, legal or not, and I have collected a giant database called GPT 4 point whatever at this point, 5 point or 16 at the time, whatever, it doesn't matter. And that giant database of, I'm calling it a database because that's what it is. It's a giant database of all this knowledge out there, and everything that it can crawl out there is going to be all of the existing code that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And the existing code out
code.
there, open source code's out. Hopefully, open source code's out there is going to be. You're already thinking it. It's going to already be mostly Python, mostly JavaScript, mostly all the already popular ones. So you get into that typical issue of like, whatever's popular continues to be popular because it's popular, that cyclical cycle of just feeding itself regardless of whether or not it's actually wanted.
Or as good as another option. Yeah, it's just you have so much material that is being fed to the LLMs that the LLMs are better at generating that type of code.
It's the Ouroboros here. It's a snake eating itself at this point where just because there's a lot of Java out there doesn't mean it's a lot of good Java. It could be, OpenAI is just consuming a lot of bad Java and give you a lot of bad Java, on the other side because of that. So that's the large part of this, the large language model part of this is that, okay, that's the state of things, but why does that matter for job markets?
Right.
Well, you got the doom and gloom headline of no one's needing developers anymore because we have AI. Part of that, there's going to be an element of that could be true, or at least that folks are going to be investigating. Mm-hmm. So it's about developers becoming more effective at things. So the typical problems where managers might throw bodies at a problem may need to throw less bodies at a problem. But it doesn't mean that those bodies are really doing a lot of intellectual work. That was the typical way that you solved problems. If you have a giant skyscraper to build, you need 1 million construction workers to do the thing. Likewise for software, you just need a lot more. If you got a big project, you need a lot of people. Yep. Now, you can make individual, workers more effective if you give them a good toolbox to work from, such as large language models. And so, that is one aspect of this that might be decreasing the need for software engineers. But I'd like to also take another look at that as a non-developer trying to get into a good software development market. I need to know something that is hireable, but then also something that can teach me. And a common teaching tool nowadays is going to be these LLMs. Yeah. And so if these LLMs are constantly spewing out junk Java, then they're going to be learning junk Java.
You mentioned LLMs as a way of learning, right?
Yeah.
Just recently, my nephew, who's 10 years old, has been teaching himself calculus through ChatGPT and learning calculus because he just thinks it's cool. Not everyone's doing that kind of stuff, but the LLMs are giving access to knowledge. So I would argue you could hire a junior developer or a mid-level developer, and you couple that with an LLM, and they're hitting above their weight, right? They are performing better. You're getting more value out of that than just one or the other.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's just like a lot that AI can do and a lot that you can ask it. And if you need to figure out how to do something, you can figure out how to do it fairly quickly.
You have been talking with one or more recruiters, and I was just curious if you could share some of the overall big picture stuff that was being shared with you. Like, what is the current job market as they were seeing it and how they were explaining it to you?
I feel like in general, they share a lot of that, like they're hiring for mainly senior developers and like how to make my resume as a junior stand out, even if I'm not a senior developer. So,
yeah, I think that's one of the problems we've been seeing and hearing is that people are just saying, like employers are saying, my situation's unique. I just need someone who can hit the ground running at breakneck speed. I need someone who's senior. And I'm not even considering mid-level or junior.
I feel like when I'm actually looking for jobs, most of them all say senior.
Yeah.
But I have found that when I just talk to people, like reach out to the owner of a company or whatever, they're willing to like be like, oh, we might be opening up a position soon and maybe we'll think about you. So
yeah, I suspect that a lot of people may not be posting the jobs for juniors because you get those 5,000 applications, right? and then like, how do I even deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you're onto something. I think, yeah, a lot of folks are posting like these outsized, requirements as a filter, as a natural filter. As a human, who wouldn't want the best, to work with, right?
Yeah.
Of course, that's what you want. The real limitations is what the hiring pool is and what kind of budget you have. And so if the budget's low, then that kind of that pigeonholes you into junior developers that are trying to break into the market. Another side, though, is it really kind of depends on what they're asking for or what they really need, I guess. For example, a senior developer isn't necessarily because they program faster.
Right.
It's not because they type faster. It's because they want at least a couple of years of experience to know how not to do it wrong. Or not even wrong, but to where they don't have to rewrite it in the year after that, right?
Yeah.
Another facet might be, it's not that they actually want a senior developer that knows how to do it really, really well. It's that part of the gap that organization has is a leadership gap, and they need someone that can do both. They need someone that can lead a little bit, wear a couple of hats, but also 40% of the time do a little development as well.
Yeah.
And so that leadership, I've met a lot of young people that have incredible leadership chops, but they still get pigeonholed into, junior kind of things. Because, I don't know, society has agreed that you got to be old to be a leader.
You made me think there are other things that come with senior, right? And that's like you have experience with architectural design, right? Knowing how to structure this program in a way where it will have performance at scale without, falling over. That may be a part of it. I also totally recognize that I think a lot of companies their exclusion of junior and mid is actually very short-sighted. It's thinking, my situation's unique. I need only a senior, when really a mid-level person would be perfect for the job. It'd be saving money for the company, and it'd also be helping to elevate and build a career. But then what ends up happening is if that happens across the board, then no juniors are moving up, right? They're not being able to become the new seniors. And then you just run out of seniors because they retire at some point.
Yeah. So as a individual company, there's no rules about that, about depleting the market of seniors, right? Or you can think demographically for like countries, the latest stats I remember, like for Korea or Japan, is that they're going to age themselves out, and their population is going to, be a lot lower in the next generation because they're just not having babies, that kind of thing. We have, as developers, we have an interest of growing our community, and our community being the Elixir community. Generally, across the Elixir community, we want to grow the community, and we have to, quote unquote, make babies.
Baby developers, yeah.
We got to get those juniors, we got to raise up some juniors to have like that next generation, folks going in there. But I suspect that that's a red herring in itself, that from the company's perspective, they need somebody with a lot of experience. I think that's usually an excuse, because like I said, like, we do have LLMs, we do have like smarter tools that can help junior developers be more effective, but also there's all of that other stuff surrounding them that we don't get to benefit from. The general attitude being one of them, another one being the leadership qualities that they do have, like inherently, all of the other like skills that they have that they can bring to the table that isn't necessarily lines per hour kind of thing. We miss out on all that kind of stuff. So if we think politically, governments would institute laws at this point, right? To say, we have to ensure that there's another generation because it is in the benefit of all society, and that's the government's responsibility. But there is no equivalent for that, in programming communities. There's no overarching government that says that all Elixir companies have to hire one, junior developer, at least one.
Maybe they're all thinking that AI is going to take over, and so they don't need to train them. I don't know.
Well, it's goofy because like Salesforce, big company, right? They are having financial problems. And they laid off like 1,000 workers and said, AI can replace everything that they were doing, which isn't true. But that is the kind of thing, because Salesforce, it's a whole other topic, right? They were very late to adopting AI. They're trying to make up for lost ground, and they're trying to show their investors or customers like, hey, we're super good with AI, right? Like they're trying to flex. And so it's misleading, but it does send a signal like, oh, maybe people are being replaced by AI, right? Even though I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. Oh, the lie continues, right?
Yeah.
So, but I want to reframe a bit, reposition how we think about this. How do we resolve this? What's the positive path forward here? What do we do about it?
Yeah, exactly.
We've kind of complained. We think we know what's going on, but what can we do about it? Maybe I'll start. Kimberly, you're probably the most relevant to this. So you're going to have the most like forefront knowledge of what to do about it. So check me on this. Let me know if this is true. When I was in the market, so to speak, like your resume, it's always been a craft to what your resume should be for who it's being sent to. Mm-hmm. There's always been a problem of getting 5,000 non-irrelevant applicants, just because it got scraped on some site and somebody's just trying to get a job for anything out there, even if they're good for it or not. So that's always been a problem. This is not a new problem. And forever breaking into the market for a new career has always been, difficult. So these are not new problems as far as I can tell. Maybe it's just more important nowadays to be a professional job hunter than it was before. And a professional job hunter means like it is your full-time job to get the job. And so your full-time job means I have a resume for this particular place. This particular place has these keywords all in their job posting. I have to match those keywords as much as possible. We're not going to lie, never going to lie about it, but I'm going to put forward all of the most positive things, that I can, all the experience, the evidence-based bullet points on my resume about how I achieve these things. Not just, I know Elixir, that's a minimum, but I shipped and I maintained, an open source library in Elixir, and I was the team lead on this project that shipped this, that had an X amount of financial impact on the other side. Now, all that is true, but that doesn't mean that you in your day-to-day were responsible for the financial impact of it. That just means that you had that incredible influence entrusted to you when you did that feature back when you were doing that project, where that bullet point on your resume. Like that's the kind of like crafting of that resume that has to really be considered again. I think it's even more important. Throwing AI, on there would be good. Like I really know how to use the AI tools, to my benefit, and without turning off my brain, because there is the other side of the spectrum of people that only rely on AI folks. I've definitely done my share of interviewing folks that turn off their brain when they do an interview. You could tell they're looking off at the script of OpenAI, typing out the response to give, exactly to the interviewer's question. Like I've seen that, and it's an instant rejection. Like we can't do that. We can't do that. You got to keep your brain on. We hire brains.
So, I want to come back to that point. I think there's some interesting things I'd learned in talking with other people about what they're seeing in the job market right now. But we were also just talking about resumes. So Kimberly, I wanted to ask you about submitting applications and resumes. You may have been considering like, well, I could go the recruiter route and rely on them to do it for me, or I could be like hunting for jobs myself and submitting. And like, what have you been finding there in terms of being able to get any kind of traction?
I feel like I more took the route of just reaching out to people. And, but I did have one recruiter recently reach out to me, Jason Brown. and he recruits like specifically in the Elixir space. And I was really impressed with how he helped me build my resume. Because I think I just put like Elixir developer, 2.5 years of experience or whatever. And he was like, it's not good enough. And told me how I needed to like, name those specific things that I had done on my resume and to use the word Elixir, Ecto, like all the words that the companies who are hiring are looking for. So that was really helpful just to get feedback that like my resume's it's not good. So and now I look at my resume and I'm like, my resume is so beautiful. Like it's top notch. Like like any employer would want to hire me based off my resume now, I feel like.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that was really helpful. I think you'd also asked just like how I've gained some traction. I initially like thought submitting resumes wouldn't be like even impactful at all. So I've kind of just not taken that route. But I heard back from someone that I submitted a resume back in December, and they were like, hey, like, we really want to interview you, and you submitted your resume, and I hadn't even remembered submitting this resume. So I guess it is good, is what I'm saying. It is good to submit resumes. Yeah.
What I think is interesting about that is that's also a signal from the job market that they may have been taking resumes for an open position, but they may not even come back to you for several months. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's like, before the end of the year, the budget kind of runs out and they have to wait for the new budget to kick in for January. And then, so now we've got cleared for hiring this many people. All right, so now let's look through the resumes we already had. So things like that can just cause it to be drawn out. Mm-hmm. And what really stinks is you have no idea if you're going to get a call. Yeah. And lots of times what will happen is maybe you end up taking a position somewhere and then they reach out and it's like, I'm sorry, I've already taken a job,
Yeah.
But it's that whole situation of putting the work in. It may take months before you actually see some of that fruit that you're able to get from that early work. And I totally recognize, like, if you are like the primary income in your household or your family, waiting months is like not viable. Right, like that
doesn't pay the bills. Yeah, you're right.
Like, so like that doesn't help, right? I totally recognize that, but it's just one of those things that we've been seeing in the market.
Yeah, and can't ignore churn that just happens all the time anyway, or a team expands for one reason or another, priorities get moved around, and need to get more. I hate to do this, or I hate to call it this, but this is the way that it's seen in a lot of ways. But we're resources,
Yep.
Developers are resources. I hate to consider myself a resource, but it is. We are a resource. Per priorities and per budgeting, you can get more resources. And so, yeah, when they opened it up back in December, it may not be because they actually had a position open, but they suspected that it was about to be, coming up. And so they wanted to get that pool built so they could spend some time, going through that for when that opportunity actually happens, 2 months later, right. or they didn't know it would happen and someone actually left. And now, now we gotta backfill, something like that. You never know. Yeah. What's going to happen. You said something, at the top, which I think is probably the first tip though, is that friends hire friends. Mm-hmm. I won't go through my whole history, but that's like 90% of how I've ever been hired anywhere, is I've had a friend that hired me. Back in my day, remote work was just not a very common thing. It wasn't very accepted. So you had to be in a city, with a healthy tech hub. You're blessed with that right now in Lehigh, Utah. Thank goodness. RTP in the Durham area was amazing, as well. That was where I came up in the world. And so I went through a coding boot camp that had connections to all those companies. We were basically a pipeline of juniors, of cheap labor, to get into the company. And so that's your entry point. Fantastic. You got your entry point there. That's like the hardest thing. Yep. And then after that, it was meetups, and meetups at that time were all still pretty much physically located wherever you were. Yeah. And that's where you made those actual connections of other people in other companies, and you made friends there. And then that's how you got the inside knowledge that they were about to hire somebody. And that was friends hiring friends at that point. And then it just kind of like, again, the snake eating itself. It's just the endless cycle at that point. You're in at that point. Yeah. Now, you're always going to have those moments of difficulty. It happens to everybody. The whole market kind of, downturns and all. But friends hiring friends, even to this day, is still like 90% of how I've ever experienced getting hired anywhere.
Well, I want to speak to that specifically, right? So my experience getting the job at Koali. So I started originally with a reverse headhunter, right? What that means is the headhunter makes personal relationships with the hiring managers of different companies, and then they find candidates and push them towards these companies. So the companies may not even have a published open position. So like that's the whole reverse headhunter thing. So I started with that. From that, I got several introductions to different companies, which was very instructive. I learned a lot just about the current market and what people were looking for, but I didn't get hired by anybody that way. The only reason I got the job was because of friends. And let me lay it out, right? A previous coworker saw the job posting when it showed up and said, "Hey, Mark, you should check this out." And so I applied. And then during the application process and the interviews, I mentioned that 2 of my previous coworkers had worked there before. With this whole hiring, they had like a technical interview where you're like real time on a Zoom call solving technical puzzles problems, right? And I did not do well with it. And I had to look back at my job history and think, when was the last time I had to do one of these types of tech challenges? It's been 13 years since I've done one of those. All the other ones are either like I didn't have to do one because I already had a relationship with them, or I didn't have to do one because it was a take-home project, all these different things. I had never done like, it used to be the whiteboard, write a sorting algorithm kind of thing, right? But yeah, so I did not do very good on the in-person, here, solve a problem right now. And I realized, man, I had not prepped for that. I had not given that enough focus and attention. But because they liked their 2 previous coworkers that had worked there, they reached out to them and said, "So tell me about Mark, is he okay?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, you should definitely hire him." Both of them did. And that's why I got the job, right? Is because of 3 people, 1 telling me about it, 2 vouching for me, that's why I got the job.
And that happens even as a senior developer, right?
Yes.
Like we still go through the same things. Our resumes are probably just as trash as most of those out there, but I guess we've just been around a little longer and therefore have a bit more connection, so we don't as often have the trouble as much as juniors do.
And I feel like that also speaks to just like wherever you're at, like if you end up having to leave somewhere or whatever you end up having to do, just keeping those relationships positive and being sure that you always are being someone that people want to work with, because you never know. First of all, because you should just be a good human, but then second, like it is helpful. Like I had that happen to me recently too, where I was interviewing and the person I interviewed with reached out to someone I knew and they're like, "Oh yeah, for sure hire her." And so it's good to just keep positive relationships with everyone you work with. So
yeah. And I just want to call out that lots of times the people who are in the programming community, I'm thinking of the guys, we tend to be more introverted, just in general speaking, not everybody. But and so keeping some of those social connections doesn't come supernaturally. And just want to call out how important that is to actually do, to maintain those social connections, even when you're not working there anymore. Yeah. Because what happens is, unless you're moving cross country, you're going to keep seeing those same people at different jobs. Yeah. So you don't want to burn anything, right? And you want to maintain those connections.
The Elixir community being small, and this is a characteristic of any of them out there. But yeah, we're going to see each other again, kind of thing. you meet the folks at Elixir Conf, which by the way, recommend going to these kinds of conferences to get those personal connections. Especially the regional ones. They're probably a bit more effective when it comes to getting those closer connections, at least until remote work comes back into general acceptance. Yeah. But yeah, those are good. I brought up Meetup a while ago and kind of my abridged journey into getting into the software development market. But I have to admit, though, much like just generally the economy today, for where are we at now? What's the market that's going? What's the age group that's going into the market at this point? Gen Alpha?
Yeah.
Z? Zoomers?
Is it Z?
Z?
Gen Z?
I feel like that's probably right.
I think it's like Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, and then Gen Alphas, I think is what it is.
Okay. Well, let's go with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. You know, and I'm assuming, Kimberly, that you're among them.
I think I'm actually a millennial.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm an elder millennial. I'm barely a millennial, and I remember being ashamed of that. Now I don't care. But anyway, you know, every generation has their ups and downs, and you know, it's easier for them or harder for others. And I think that like Generation Z and Alphas are generally going to have a harder time. I guess it's not really about the age group, really. Maybe it's like the phase of life of trying to get into the career that matters more. But you know, like I mentioned before, like I went in through the time that Meetup.com was mostly about physical locations and physical meetings and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think that's happening as much anymore. So that tool is just simply not there as much, you know, just like what was it 5 years ago, I was able to get a mortgage on a house for 2.75%, you know, like you just can't do that anymore, you know? And so like the typical response of people just being like, yeah, you know, my dad said that, you know, you just buy the house and you're lucky you got the 2.75%. I was like, yeah, maybe I was lucky to get that mortgage. I don't have it now, for what it's worth, which I did cry over, but I don't have it now. But on the same hand, these houses are also like nearly $1 million freaking dollars at this point, and they were $10,000 back in your day, Grandpa. So like, you know, like it's harder now, I think, for breaking into, you know, a smaller community's programming language without remote work, without meetups, you know, physical meetups. It's harder nowadays. So yes, like it's not just you, you know, and I'm talking beyond, you know, for all the listeners, it's not just you if you're having trouble getting any job, not even talking about Elixir at this point. You know, let me remind you, the federal government's being, you know, decimated right now too. So there's a flood of people entering, you know, the job market. There's a flood of layoffs happening for various reasonings. You know, the job market is tough. It's not just you. So that just means that if you're going to try to break through that, it's just going to be harder, and you have to be more tactical. And yes, you need more help. Recruiters are one of those sources where they can be of great help getting to some of your contacts, you know, such as us, the show, you know, to helping craft resumes. Now I wouldn't trust us with that, because we're not great at that part. You know, don't trust us with your job. But you know, those that are already, you know, well situated could provide a leg up.
Yeah. But Kimberly, when we were talking about this discussion, you had some great interviewing tips. And I thought maybe for anyone out there who's in the job market and might want to have some, you know, think about some of these interviewing tips, these are just good to hit on and touch on. Maybe we could start with the staying positive one.
Yeah, I think it's super important that when you're interviewing, you stay positive. Like if you're currently at a company and you feel like, I don't know, there's things you need to leave the company for, like focus on that you're ready to grow in certain ways, that you want more autonomy, all the things that the company that you're hiring for, let them know that that's who you are. And if you're at a company that has some negative things going on, I would do your best not to even talk about it. Like if they try to pull out all the dirty details about things that are going on and why you're wanting to leave your current situation, I would avoid talking about it and just focus on their company and why you're super interested in their company and why you're just the best fit for them.
Right on.
Yeah, you could totally be like, oh yeah, I hate working with so and so, or the culture is just awful, or you know, you might have all these, and then it could be completely valid, but it's not going to help you to do that, to talk about that.
During the interview, they're trying to evaluate like what it would be like to work with you. You know, not why you're trying to get away from a bad environment. Fully trust that you're getting away from a bad environment, but that's not relevant right now. I'm trying to figure out what it's like to work with you.
Totally. Yeah.
So stay positive. Yep.
I would also just be sure to highlight your growth. I mean, the company that you are currently with or were with, like you started with them for a reason, and you've grown like exponentially since you've been there. And there's a lot to talk about, your personal growth. and the things that you've contributed to the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing on that growth and how you plan to continue your growth. So your growth in the future with their company, and really get them in the mindset of you being with them and you being their future can help them look at you in the most positive light and help you talk about yourself in the most positive light. So.
Well, we're running out of time here, but I do think that there's some really good call to actions here. You know, Kimberly, you just went through like some interviewing tips about staying positive, essential. That's what you can do as an interviewee. But what about the hiring managers out there? You know, what are some things that some points that they might consider?
Yeah, totally. I think that juniors are we're a great investment. We're looking for somewhere that we can be, long-term and that we can grow with. And we're also a great way to stay within your budget too, because oftentimes, especially with AI, we can get a lot of really good work done while also keeping your budget a little lower. And we also we're pretty excited and enthusiastic to learn. We're in this growth mindset, which keeps, everyone in that growth mindset. You're asking questions to people who are farther ahead of you, and it makes them think more on, oh yeah, like, why are we doing it this way? Or
enthusiasm is infectious. It's true.
Yes, totally. So yeah, we can totally help build that enthusiastic team culture that you're looking for while you're building out your product. And we also just help grow the Elixir community like the community wants. New people, and we want to grow the Elixir community. We're only 12 years old. So hiring us helps develop the community and get more people out there. And
it's not just, that one junior, it's that juniors network as well that can be influenced to become, part of the Elixir, community at large for the next junior that you want to hire as well.
True.
Totally. Yeah.
Some other things that come to mind. Juniors can take on some of those tasks that need to get done, but they're not like super hard. A lot of different people in the organization could take on these tasks, but someone needs to. So hire a junior.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Put your seniors on the stuff that you pay a senior for, and put your juniors to mids on stuff that you would, pay a junior to mid for. So
yeah.
For me, I'm like junior to mid level, and I had the opportunity to mentor like a intern at my last company. And for me, that was like a huge growth opportunity. So I feel like for seniors, it's also a growth opportunity for them. Yeah, I would say it just helps everyone grow to have the differing levels, just like you have, families. Like families, you have little kids that are all at different levels, and it just helps everyone to grow. So
yeah, it's an awesome. Incomplete picture even for seniors if they only have seniors. You only have peers, right? And a boss, right? So a level up and a level around. But if there's no one below, they're missing a part of like their own profile, as well. There's all of those other skills that it takes to be, a teacher, to explain, to realize why we do things, or to realize that there are these areas over here that need to be taken care of. We need those smaller problems that are less overwhelming for folks to be able to tackle, on their own. Every person really needs to have someone above, ideally a mentor, their peers around them, and those below them. Not necessarily folks that they're all mentoring, but folks are below them that
they can influence.
Yeah, that they can influence. It feels good all the way around. Yeah, to be an influencer. It's influencing in a real human way, with people around you.
Well, thank you, Kimberly, for joining us to talk about this discussion, which I think is really important, right? We need to think about how we grow the Elixir community, and not just bringing people in from other communities, but just bringing people into this as a career path too. If people want to get in contact with you because they say, I think Kimberly would be awesome to hire because I think you should. You, dear listener, you should reach out to her and say, hey, we want to hire you. But how do they get in touch with you?
You can find me just on LinkedIn, Kimberly Ernie. So yeah, just connect with me there. And yeah, I'd love to look into opportunity to work with you.
All right, and we'll have links to that in the show notes. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next time on Thinking Elixir.